The sound of thunder rolled across the Oklahoma plains on that September evening in 1878, though the sky held not a single cloud. And Dalton McKenzie realized as he stepped onto his porch that the rumbling came from hooves beating hard against the packed earth of the old cattle trail that ran past his ranch. He squinted into the dying light and saw her then, a figure in white riding side saddle on a horse that looked ready to collapse, her veil streaming behind her like a ghost's proclamation. She pulled the horse to a stop at his gate, swaying in the saddle, and Dalton moved without thinking, years of instinct pushing him forward to catch her as she slid sideways. The wedding dress she wore was torn at the hem and stained with red Oklahoma clay, and when he steadied her, she looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds and asked in a voice that cracked with exhaustion, "Can broken people heal?" Dalton stood there holding this stranger, this bride who had appeared out of nowhere, and found himself without words. He was not a man given to quick responses or easy sentiment. At 32, he had lived alone on this ranch for the better part of 8 years, ever since his parents died within months of each other and left him this land 20 miles outside Oklahoma City. The silence suited him. The solitude felt earned after watching his father waste away from consumption, and his mother follow from what the doctor called a broken heart, but what Dalton knew was simply the giving up that came when a person had nothing left to hold on to. "Can you stand?" he finally asked, and the woman nodded, though when he released her, she grabbed his arm to keep from falling. Up close, he could see that she was young, maybe 24 or 25, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and framed a face that would have been beautiful if not for the bruise darkening her left cheekbone and the cut on her lower lip. "I need help," she said. "Just for tonight. I will not impose beyond that." Dalton looked past her at the horse, which stood with its head hanging low, sides heaving. The animal would not make another mile. He looked back at the woman and saw that she trembled despite the warmth of the evening, and he made a decision that he would spend many nights afterward questioning, though never truly regretting. "Come inside," he said. "We will tend to your horse first." She nodded and tried to walk, but her legs buckled. Dalton caught her again and this time simply lifted her, wedding dress and all, and carried her toward the house. She stiffened in his arms but did not protest, and he could feel how thin she was beneath the layers of silk and lace, as if she had not eaten properly in days. He set her down on the porch. "Wait here. I will see to the horse and then get you something to eat." "Thank you," she whispered, and there was something in those 2 words, some depth of genuine gratitude, that made Dalton uncomfortable in a way he could not name. He led the horse to the small barn behind the house, unsaddled the poor creature, and spent the next 20 minutes rubbing it down and making sure it had water and feed. The saddle was fine leather, expensive, with silver fittings that caught the lamplight. The kind of saddle a wealthy man would buy for his daughter or his wife. Dalton ran his thumb over an engraving on the stirrup. "To my dearest R, with all my love, Father." When he returned to the house, he found the woman still sitting where he had left her, her hands folded in her lap, staring out at the darkening plains. She looked like a painting, something fragile and out of place in his rough bachelor home with its simple furniture and lack of decoration. "What is your name?" Dalton asked as he opened the door and gestured for her to enter. She stood slowly, using the porch rail for support. Rose Remington." "Dalton McKenzie," he said, and watched as she stepped carefully over the threshold and into his home. The interior was as simple as the exterior suggested. One main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A hallway led to 2 bedrooms and a small washroom. Everything was clean but sparse, the home of a man who saw no point in excess. Rose stood in the center of the room and slowly turned, taking it all in. "You live here alone." "I do. It is very neat. I see no point in living in disorder." She almost smiled at that, he thought, though the expression never quite reached her lips. "No, I suppose there is not much point in that." Dalton moved to the stove and began heating up the stew he had made that morning. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the table. "You look ready to fall over." Rose moved to the table and lowered herself into a chair with the careful movements of someone in pain. Dalton noticed, but said nothing as he prepared a plate of food and set it before her along with a cup of water from the pump. She stared at the food for a long moment, then picked up the spoon and began to eat. She took small bites at first, as if testing whether her stomach would accept the offering, then ate with more eagerness. Dalton busied himself with making coffee and tried not to watch her too obviously. When she had finished, Rose set down the spoon and met his eyes. "Thank you, I have not eaten since yesterday morning." "Where were you going?" Dalton asked. "Running from or running to?" "Just running," she said quietly. "Though I suppose that is the same as running from." Dalton poured coffee for both of them and sat down across from her. "That bruise on your face, someone gave you that." It was not a question. Rose touched her cheekbone lightly and winced. My former intended, I should say, during the wedding, before, and many times before that." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup as if seeking its warmth. "I knew what he was. I had known for months, but my father needed the alliance. The Remington ranch has been struggling, and Charles Morrison's family owns half the land between Oklahoma City and the Texas border. The marriage would have solved everything. Everything except your safety," Dalton said. Rose looked at him with those storm cloud eyes. "You understand quickly. I have seen men who hit women. I have no patience for them. Charles was charming in public. Everyone thought I was so fortunate to be marrying him. My father believed I was nervous, that I exaggerated. He said all men had tempers, that I needed to learn to manage mine better so as not to provoke Charles." She took a sip of coffee. "This morning, before the ceremony, Charles came to my room. He was angry that my hair was not styled the way he wanted. He hit me hard enough that I fell. And I realized that if I married him, if I said those vows, I would be giving him permission to do that for the rest of my life. So I waited until the music started, until everyone was focused on the ceremony beginning, and I ran. You stole a horse, my own horse, the one my father gave me, the one with his inscription on the saddle." She smiled bitterly. "I suppose even in rebellion I could not bring myself to steal." Dalton studied her face, noting the determined set of her jaw beneath the exhaustion. "They will look for you, I know. Your father and this Charles Morrison, and probably half of Oklahoma City. It is not every day that a bride runs away from her own wedding." Rose met his gaze steadily. "Which is why I will leave in the morning. I am grateful for your hospitality, but I will not bring trouble to your door." "Where will you go?" She was silent for a long moment. "I have an aunt in Kansas. She has written to me over the years, though my father discouraged the correspondence. She told me once that I would always have a place with her if I needed it. I suppose now I need it. Kansas is a long way on a horse that can barely stand. Then I will walk part of it." Dalton shook his head. "That is not practical." "Perhaps not, but it is all I have." Rose stood, her movements stiff. "If you could direct me to where I might sleep tonight, I will leave at first light and trouble you no more." "You asked me something when you arrived," Dalton said, remaining seated, "about broken people healing." Rose went still. "I did. What made you ask that?" She turned away from him, looking toward the dark window. "I am 24 years old. I have been engaged twice. The first man died in a shooting outside a saloon, caught in crossfire that had nothing to do with him. I grieved him truly. The second was Charles, and I think I knew from the first week that he was cruel. But I accepted his courtship anyway because my father needed me to, and because I thought perhaps I did not deserve better after losing Jonathan. And now I have humiliated my family, destroyed their alliance, and fled into the night like a criminal. I am broken in ways I cannot even name. So I ask you, can such a person heal? Can someone like me ever be whole again? The raw honesty in her voice struck something in Dalton that he had thought long buried. He stood and crossed to where she stood, stopping a respectful distance away. "I believe," he said slowly, "that broken people can heal, but perhaps not in the way they expect. Perhaps healing means becoming something different, something stronger in the broken places." Rose turned to look at him. "You speak as if you know." "I do. My father died slowly. I watched him fade day by day for a year. My mother lasted 3 months after he passed. She simply stopped trying. Stopped eating, stopped getting out of bed. The doctor said her heart gave out, but I know she chose to go. And I was angry at both of them for a long time. Angry at my father for getting sick, angry at my mother for giving up, angry at myself for not being reason enough for her to stay." "That must have been terrible," Rose said softly. "It was. And for a long time I thought I was broken beyond repair. I isolated myself out here, convinced that caring about anything or anyone was too dangerous, too painful. But over time I realized that the breaking had not destroyed me. It had changed me, made me more careful, yes, but also more aware of what matters and what does not." "And what matters?" Rose asked. Dalton found himself speaking words he had never said aloud to anyone. "Honesty matters. Kindness matters. Having the courage to keep going even when everything seems pointless. Those things matter." Rose searched his face as if looking for deception and finding none. "You are not what I expected when I rode up to your door." "What did you expect?" "I do not know, but not someone who would understand." She swayed slightly on her feet and Dalton reached out to steady her. "You need rest," he said. "Take my bedroom, I will sleep out here." "I cannot take your bed." "You can and will. You are exhausted and hurt and I am neither." He guided her toward the hallway before she could protest further. "There are clean clothes in the trunk at the foot of the bed. They belong to my mother. You are welcome to anything that fits." Rose looked up at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything." "Are you? No. Then that is why." Dalton opened the bedroom door and lit the lamp on the small table beside the bed. The room was simple like the rest of the house, but the bed was well made with quilts his mother had sewn, and the window faced east to catch the morning sun. Rose walked into the room and ran her hand over the quilt. "These are beautiful. My mother was talented with a needle. She must have been a wonderful woman. She was, until grief took her." Dalton moved toward the door. "I will be just outside if you need anything. Do not hesitate to call out." "Dalton," Rose said as he reached the threshold. He turned back. "Yes, thank you for answering my question. For not thinking I was foolish for asking." "There is nothing foolish about seeking hope," he said, and then left her to her rest. Dalton lay on the sofa that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the house settling around him. He could hear Rose moving quietly in the bedroom, could picture her shedding the ruined wedding dress and finding something more practical to wear. He wondered what had possessed him to be so open with her, to share things he had never spoken of with anyone in the 8 years since his mother's death. Perhaps it was the directness of her question. Perhaps it was the bruise on her face and the exhaustion in her eyes. Or perhaps it was simply that he recognized in her the same fundamental loneliness, that had been his constant companion for so long, and recognition created a kind of kinship. He must have eventually dozed because he woke to the sound of the front door opening. Dalton sat up quickly, instinct sending his hand toward the rifle he kept by the sofa. But it was only Rose, now dressed in one of his mother's simple calico dresses, standing on the porch in the pre-dawn darkness. He joined her outside, and they stood together watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to the pale gold of early morning. Neither spoke for several minutes. "I have not seen a sunrise in years," Rose finally said. "I mean, I have seen them, but I have not really watched one." "Does that make sense?" "It does. Charles did not like me to be awake early. He said it was unseemly for a woman to be up before her husband, that it suggested she had somewhere to be other than attending to his needs." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warmth. "I used to love mornings. When I was young, before my mother died, she and I would rise early and walk through the garden while the dew was still on the flowers. She taught me the names of all the plants, told me stories about each one. After she passed, I kept up the tradition for a while, but then it became too painful. And then I met Charles, and he made me feel guilty for wanting time to myself." Dalton listened, understanding that she needed to speak these things aloud, to give voice to the experiences that had led her to his door. "I think that is how it happened," Rose continued. "How I became someone I did not recognize. It was not all at once. It was small things. Giving up my morning walks, changing how I wore my hair, laughing at jokes I did not find funny, staying quiet when I disagreed with something. Each thing seemed insignificant on its own, but together they added up to a kind of erasure. By the time Charles first hit me, I was already so diminished that I almost believed I deserved it." "You did not deserve it," Dalton said firmly. "No one deserves that. I know that now, or at least I am learning to know it." She turned to look at him. "When I asked you if broken people can heal, I think what I really meant was, can I find myself again? The person I was before I started giving pieces of myself away." "I do not think you get back to who you were," Dalton said slowly, working through the thought even as he spoke it. "I think you become someone new, someone who remembers the before but also carries the after. The question is whether that new person is one you can live with." Rose considered this. "And are you someone you can live with most days? Only most. Some days the loneliness is louder than others." "Yes," Rose said softly. "I understand that." They stood in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the Oklahoma plains in shades of copper and gold. Dalton found himself acutely aware of Rose's presence beside him, of the way she breathed and moved and existed in the space. It was not an attraction, not exactly, though he could not deny that she was beautiful even with her bruised face and exhausted eyes. It was more a sense of recognition, as if they were two instruments tuned to the same key. "I should prepare to leave," Rose said, though she made no move to go inside. "Your horse is not ready for a long journey. It needs more rest." "I do not have time for rest. My father will come looking, and when he does, I need to be far from here." "Then take one of my horses," Dalton said, surprising himself. "Yours can recover here, and I will return it to your father with a message that you are safe but do not wish to be followed." Rose stared at him. "You would do that? Face my father and Charles Morrison?" "I would." "Why? You do not know me. You owe me nothing." Dalton met her gaze. "Perhaps I do not like the idea of a woman being forced to marry a man who hurts her. Perhaps I think that if I had a daughter who ran away in a wedding dress, I would want to know she had found help. Or perhaps I am just tired of standing by while the world does harm to people who do not deserve it." Tears filled Rose's eyes. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will accept the help. Say you will let me do this one thing." "I will," she whispered, "and I will find a way to repay you. No repayment necessary, just write to me when you reach your aunt's so I know you arrived safely." Rose wiped at her eyes. "I will write, I promise." They went inside, and Dalton prepared a breakfast of eggs and bread while Rose sat at the table and watched him work. He found himself hyper-aware of her presence, of the way she observed him with those thoughtful gray eyes, as if she were cataloging every detail to remember later. "You are a good cook," Rose said as she ate. "Most men who live alone survive on beans and dried meat. My mother taught me. She said that learning to cook was not about gender but about survival, and that any person who wanted to live well should know how to feed themselves properly." She sounds like she was ahead of her time, in some ways. In others, she was very traditional. She loved my father deeply, built her whole life around him. When he died, she did not know how to be a person separate from him. I think that is what killed her more than grief, the loss of identity. "Is that why you live alone?" Rose asked gently. "Because you are afraid of losing yourself in another person." Dalton set down his fork. "I live alone because it is easier than risking that kind of loss again. After watching what my mother went through, I decided it was safer to not need anyone." "But you are lonely." "Yes. So you traded one kind of pain for another." "I suppose I did." Rose reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "Thank you for your honesty. It means more than you know." After breakfast, Dalton saddled his second-best horse, a strong mare named Clementine, and helped Rose prepare for her journey. He packed food and water, added a bedroll and a warm coat, and checked over every detail to ensure she had what she needed. Rose changed back into his mother's dress, as her wedding gown was too impractical for travel, and Dalton found himself struck by how different she looked from the desperate woman who had arrived the previous evening. There was color in her cheeks now, and though exhaustion still lined her face, she carried herself with more confidence. "The road to Kansas will take you north through Guthrie," Dalton explained, showing her the route on a crude map he had sketched. "Stay on the main trails. Do not make camp where you cannot see in all directions. If anyone asks, you are traveling to meet your husband who works for the railroad." "You have thought of everything," Rose said, studying the map. "I have tried." He hesitated, then added, "Rose, if you find yourself in trouble or if Kansas does not work out, you can come back here. My door will be open to you." She looked up at him with an expression of such gratitude and something else, something warmer and more complicated, that it made his chest tighten. "You are a good man, Dalton McKenzie. I hope you know that. I am just a man trying to do the right thing. That is what makes you good." They walked together to where Clementine waited, saddled and ready. Dalton helped Rose mount, his hand steady on her waist, and for a moment they were close enough that he could smell the soap she had used and see the flecks of green in her gray eyes. "Be safe," he said, stepping back. "I will. And Dalton, thank you for showing me that broken people can heal. Thank you for being proof of it." She turned Clementine toward the north, and Dalton stood watching until horse and rider became a small dark speck on the horizon, and then disappeared entirely. Only then did he allow himself to acknowledge the strange emptiness that had opened in his chest, as if in the span of one night and one morning he had become accustomed to not being alone. The rest of that day passed slowly. Dalton threw himself into work, mending fence posts and mucking out the barn and doing all the tasks he had been putting off. But his mind kept drifting to Rose, wondering how far she had gotten, whether she was safe, if she was frightened traveling alone. He was cleaning tack in the barn when he heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Dalton set down the bridle he had been oiling and walked to the barn door just as 4 riders came to a halt in his yard. The man in front was perhaps 50, well dressed in a fine suit that spoke of wealth, his face weathered but distinguished. Behind him rode a younger man with cold blue eyes and a cruel set to his mouth, and two ranch hands who looked uncomfortable to be there. The younger man had to be Charles Morrison, and the older man likely Rose's father. Dalton stepped out into the yard, his hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The older man dismounted, his movements stiff with anger. "I am Thomas Remington. I am looking for my daughter. We have tracked her horse to your property." "The horse is in my barn," Dalton said calmly. "Your daughter is not." Charles Morrison dismounted as well, his hand already on his weapon. "Where is she? What have you done with her?" "I have done nothing with her. She arrived here yesterday evening in need of help. I provided it. She left this morning and I do not know where she went." "You are lying," Charles snarled. "She is here somewhere. Search the house," he ordered the ranch hands. "You have no right to search my property," Dalton said, his voice hard. "And your men will not be setting foot inside my home." Thomas Remington held up a hand. "Charles, wait." He turned to Dalton. "Mr. McKenzie, is it? I apologize for my soon-to-be son-in-law's behavior. He is understandably upset. My daughter has made a terrible mistake, one born of nerves and youth. I need to find her and bring her home where she belongs. With all due respect, Mr. Remington, your daughter did not seem to think she belonged with a man who gave her that bruise I saw on her face." Thomas's expression hardened. "I do not know what lies Rose told you, but my daughter has always had a tendency toward exaggeration and dramatics. Charles would never hurt her. They had a small disagreement, nothing more. A small disagreement that left her afraid to marry him. A small disagreement that she blew out of proportion," Charles cut in. "Rose is fragile, emotional. She does not understand that sometimes a firm hand is necessary to guide a woman properly." Dalton looked at Charles with undisguised contempt. "A firm hand? Is that what you call hitting a woman hard enough to bruise her face?" "I call it discipline," Charles said coldly. "And once Rose is my wife, how I choose to handle her will be none of your concern or anyone else's." "She will never be your wife," Dalton said. "She made that clear when she ran from the wedding." Charles took a step forward, his face flushed with anger. "Tell me where she is or I will beat it out of you. You are welcome to try." Thomas Remington moved between them. "Enough, Charles, get back on your horse. Mackenzie, I am a reasonable man. I am prepared to offer you money for information about my daughter's whereabouts. $500 if you tell me where she went. Your money is not of interest to me. 1,000 then. No amount will make me betray her confidence." Thomas studied him for a long moment. "You are protecting her. Why? You do not know her. What is she to you?" "She is a woman who asked for help. That is enough." "Noble," Thomas said dryly, "but foolish. You have no idea the trouble you have brought on yourself. The Morrison family has significant influence in this territory. They can make life very difficult for you." "I am not afraid of difficulty." Charles laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You should be. You have interfered in something that does not concern you, helped a woman break a legal engagement. There will be consequences." "I look forward to them," Dalton said flatly. Thomas remounted his horse, his face set in hard lines. "This is not over, Mackenzie. I will find my daughter with or without your help. And when I do, I will remember that you chose to obstruct me." The four men rode off, and Dalton stood watching them go, his jaw tight. He had expected this confrontation, had prepared himself for it, but actually facing down Rose's father and former fiancé left him unsettled. Not because he feared them, but because he now understood more fully what Rose was running from. The cold entitlement in Charles Morrison's eyes, The way he spoke of Rose as property to be managed rather than a person to be loved, it confirmed everything she had told him and more. Dalton found himself grateful that she had found the courage to run, that she had chosen the uncertain future over the certain misery of that marriage. He went back to his work, but he remained alert for the rest of the day, half expecting the men to return with the law or more force. They did not come, and as evening fell, Dalton allowed himself to relax slightly. He made a simple dinner and ate alone, and the house felt emptier than it had in years. It was strange how one person's brief presence could make such a difference, how the space that had felt sufficient for 8 years now seemed almost hollow. 3 days passed. Dalton fell back into his routines, but he found himself thinking about Rose constantly. Where was she now? Had she made good progress toward Kansas? Was she safe and unmolested on the road? He realized with some surprise that he was genuinely worried about her, that she had become important to him in the brief time they had shared. On the 4th day, a rider arrived in the afternoon. Not Thomas Remington or Charles Morrison, but a lean, hard-looking man with a deputy's badge and cold eyes. He dismounted and approached Dalton with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "Dalton McKenzie. That is me. I am Deputy Wells from Oklahoma City. I need to ask you some questions about Rose Remington." "Ask them." "When did you last see Miss Remington?" 4 days ago. She left in the morning heading north. "And you let her go alone, a woman traveling without protection?" "She is a grown woman who made her own choice." "I offered her help, and she accepted it. I did not let her do anything. It was not my decision to make." The deputy's expression suggested he found this answer unsatisfactory. "Mr. Thomas Remington has filed a complaint. He says you are harboring his daughter and refusing to release her." "Thomas Remington is mistaken. His daughter left of her own free will days ago. He can search my property if he likes, though I would prefer he obtain proper authorization first. He also says you assaulted Charles Morrison." "I did no such thing. Charles Morrison threatened me, and I stood my ground. There was no physical altercation." Deputy Wells studied him. "You are very calm for a man being accused of serious crimes." "I am calm because I have done nothing wrong. Rose Remington came to my door in need of help. I provided shelter and food for one night. She left the next morning. That is the extent of my involvement. But you know where she went." "I know where she said she was going, but I have no way to confirm she went there or arrived safely. I gave her provisions and a horse and wished her well." "That is all. Mr. Remington says his daughter is not in her right mind, that she is unstable and needs to be returned to her family for her own safety." Dalton felt anger rise in his chest. "Rose Remington was perfectly rational when I met her. She was fleeing an engagement to a man who had physically harmed her. That is not instability, that is survival. You saw evidence that Mr. Morrison hurt her. I saw a bruise on her face and a cut on her lip that she said came from him. I believed her. Based on what? You had just met her." "She could have lied." "She could have," Dalton agreed, "but she did not. I am a good judge of character, Deputy, and Rose Remington struck me as honest and desperate, not deceptive." Deputy Wells sighed. "Look, McKenzie, I do not care about the politics between these families. But Thomas Remington is a powerful man, and he wants his daughter back. If you know where she is, it would be in your best interest to tell me." "My best interest is not my primary concern. Rose asked me not to reveal her destination, and I will honor that request. Even if it brings trouble down on you, even then." The deputy shook his head. "You are either very principled or very foolish. Perhaps both. I will tell Mr. Remington what you have said. I expect he will not be satisfied and this matter will escalate. You should prepare yourself for that." "I am prepared." After the deputy left, Dalton stood in his yard and looked north, toward Kansas, toward wherever Rose had gone. He wondered if she knew the trouble her escape had caused, if she would feel guilty for bringing it to his door. He hoped not. He hoped she was far enough away by now to feel safe, to begin the process of healing that she had asked him about. A week passed, then two. Dalton heard nothing more from Thomas Remington or the authorities, and he began to think that perhaps they had given up the search, or concluded that Rose had gone too far to be easily retrieved. He tended his small herd of cattle, repaired the roof where it had started to leak, and tried not to count the days since Rose had left. Then one evening, as he was closing up the barn for the night, he saw a lone rider approaching from the north. His hand went to his pistol instinctively, but as the rider drew closer, Dalton felt his heartbeat quicken for an entirely different reason. It was Rose. She rode into his yard on Clementine, and Dalton could see immediately that something had changed. She sat taller in the saddle, her face no longer bruised, her eyes clear and bright. She wore practical traveling clothes and had her hair pulled back in a simple braid, and she looked like a woman who had found something she had been missing. Dalton helped her dismount, his hands on her waist, and when her feet touched the ground, she did not step away immediately. They stood close, looking at each other, and Dalton felt the world narrow to just the two of them. "You came back," he said. "I did." "Why, what happened in Kansas?" Rose took a breath. "I made it to my aunt's house. She welcomed me, just as she said she would. She told me I could stay as long as I needed, that she would help me build a new life there, and I tried. I truly tried to settle in, to imagine a future in Kansas. But I kept thinking about you, about the things you said, about broken people healing and becoming something new in the broken places, about having the courage to keep going even when everything seems pointless." She met his eyes. "I realized that I did not want to run to Kansas and hide. I wanted to go back to the place where I first remembered who I was, back to the person who helped me remember." Dalton's throat tightened. "Rose, your father and Charles Morrison are still looking for you. Coming back here is dangerous." "I know." Deputy Wells came to my aunt's house asking questions. She told him I had been there but left, that she did not know where I went. I was more careful on the return journey, stayed off the main roads, traveled at night when necessary. "They will not stop looking." "Then let them look." "I am tired of running, Dalton. I am tired of letting other people's expectations and cruelty dictate my life. I want to stand still. I want to fight for something rather than always fleeing from it." "Fight for what?" he asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. "For the possibility of healing, for the chance to become someone new." She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "For you, if you will have me." Dalton covered her hand with his. "Rose, we have known each other for a matter of days. We barely know each other." "I know," she said. "And yet I feel I know you better than people I have known my whole life. In one night, you showed me more genuine kindness and understanding than I received in months with Charles. You asked nothing of me, expected nothing, simply gave because it was the right thing to do. Do you know how rare that is? That is just basic decency." "Exactly, and I have learned that basic decency is far less common than it should be." She dropped her hand but did not step away. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am not asking for declarations of love or promises of forever. I am simply asking if I can stay here, if I can try to build a life on my own terms rather than running to another person's protection. And if, in the process of that, we discover that we suit each other, then perhaps something more could grow. But if not, then I will still be grateful for the chance to stand on my own feet on friendly ground." Dalton studied her face, noting the determination there, the quiet strength that had been hidden beneath exhaustion and fear when they first met. "Your father will come here again." Charles Morrison will come. Then we will face them, together if you are willing, alone if I must. You think I would let you face them alone? I think you are too good a man to do that, but I will not presume." Dalton shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips despite the seriousness of the situation. "You are remarkably stubborn. I prefer to think of it as determined." "Stay then," Dalton said, "but we do this properly. You will take the bedroom, I will sleep on the sofa. We will tell anyone who asks that you are my hired help, here to cook and manage the household. It will deflect some of the gossip, though not all of it." "Agreed." Rose smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Thank you, Dalton, for everything. Do not thank me yet. This may be the worst decision either of us has ever made." "Or the best," she said. "Time will tell." They went inside, and Dalton set about making dinner while Rose unpacked the few belongings she had brought with her. There was an ease between them that felt both strange and natural, as if they had been living together for months rather than reuniting after weeks apart. Over dinner, Rose told him about her journey to Kansas and back, about her aunt who reminded her of her mother, about the fields of sunflowers she had passed, and the kindness of a family who had shared their supper when she stopped at their farm. Dalton listened and watched and felt something unfold in his chest, something that felt suspiciously like hope. He had been alone for so long, had convinced himself that solitude was safety, and now here was this woman disrupting everything he thought he knew about himself. "What are you thinking?" Rose asked, catching him staring. "That my life has become significantly more complicated since you appeared on my porch." "Is that a complaint?" "No," he said honestly. "I do not think it is." The first few weeks of their new arrangement were both easier and harder than Dalton expected. Easier because Rose proved to be competent and hardworking, taking over the household tasks and even helping with some of the lighter ranch work. Harder because every day he spent with her made him more aware of how much he enjoyed her company, how much he had come to care about her well-being and happiness. They fell into routines. Dalton would rise early to tend the animals, and he would find Rose already awake, watching the sunrise from the porch. They would have breakfast together, then split up to handle the day's work. In the evenings, they would sit together after dinner, sometimes talking, sometimes reading in comfortable silence. Rose told him stories about her childhood, about her mother who had died when Rose was 16, about the weight of being the only daughter in a family where her father's ambitions outweighed any concern for her happiness. Dalton shared memories of his parents, of learning to work the land from his father and learning to see beauty in small things from his mother. They talked about their fears and failures, about the ways they had been broken and the ways they hoped to heal. And slowly, carefully, they began to talk about feelings that were developing between them, the attraction and affection that grew stronger with each passing day. "I am falling in love with you," Rose said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I do not expect you to say it back, and I do not want to rush you, but I believe in honesty, and it seems dishonest not to tell you." Dalton turned to look at her. "I am falling in love with you too, but Rose, there are complications. Your father, Charles Morrison, the fact that you were supposed to marry someone else mere weeks ago. I know all of that, but I also know that I have never felt this way before. With Jonathan, my first fiancé, it was sweet and comfortable, but it was not this. With Charles, there was nothing but obligation and fear. With you, I feel seen. I feel valued for who I am rather than what I represent or what I can provide. That is worth fighting for, even if the fight is difficult, especially if the fight is difficult. The things worth having are rarely easy to obtain." Dalton reached over and took her hand. "Then we will fight. Together." "Together," Rose agreed, and she laced her fingers through his. The trouble they had been anticipating arrived on a Saturday morning in late October. Dalton and Rose were working together to move the cattle to a different pasture when they heard horses approaching. A lot of horses. Thomas Remington rode at the head of a group of 8 men, including Charles Morrison and 2 individuals wearing the badges of territorial marshals. They reined in their horses in front of the house, and Dalton and Rose approached on foot, side by side. "Rose," Thomas said, his voice cold, "your adventure has gone on long enough. It is time to come home." "This is my home now," Rose said steadily. "I am not going back. You are my daughter. You do not get to make that choice. I am 24 years old. I am well past the age of majority. I absolutely get to make that choice." Charles Morrison dismounted, his face twisted with anger. "You have disgraced yourself and your family, parading around like a common whore, living in sin with this dirt farmer." "Mind your tongue," Dalton said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "Or what?" Charles sneered. "You will challenge me. You are nobody, McKenzie. A man with no family, no connections, no importance. You have stolen what belongs to me, and I will see you pay for it. Rose does not belong to you or to anyone but herself." One of the marshals dismounted, a tall man with gray hair and a weathered face. "I am Marshal Hendricks. Mr. Remington has petitioned the territorial court for guardianship over his daughter, claiming she is mentally incompetent and unable to make sound decisions. He has requested that we take her into custody until the matter can be resolved." "That is absurd," Rose said. "I am perfectly competent. I simply refuse to marry a man who has physically harmed me and to return to a father who enabled that harm." "You have proof of this harm?" Hendricks asked. "I saw the bruises," Dalton said. "The night she arrived here, she had a black eye and a split lip." "Bruises prove nothing," Charles said. "She could have gotten them anywhere. She could have given them to herself to create sympathy." "Why would I do that?" Rose demanded. "Because you are unstable," Thomas interjected. "Because you have always been prone to hysteria and exaggeration. Your mother was the same way, God rest her soul. It runs in the family. My mother was not unstable. She was sad, trapped in a loveless marriage to a man who cared more about his reputation than her happiness. She died of a broken heart, and you could not even see it." Thomas's face darkened. "How dare you speak of your mother that way?" "She loved me. She loved the man she thought you were when she married you. She did not love the man you became." Marshal Hendricks held up a hand. "This is a family dispute, and I am not here to mediate it. Miss Remington, your father has legal standing to request guardianship. Unless you can provide evidence that you are being threatened or harmed, I am obligated to take you back to Oklahoma City until the court makes its determination." "I can provide evidence," a new voice said, and everyone turned to see a woman on horseback riding into the yard. She was perhaps 50, handsome rather than beautiful, with graying brown hair and Rose's storm cloud eyes. "I am Catherine Remington Saunders, Rose's aunt. I have been staying in Oklahoma City for the past week gathering testimony about my niece's situation." Thomas's face went pale. "Catherine, what are you doing here, protecting my niece from your machinations?" Catherine dismounted and pulled a folder of papers from her saddlebag. "Marshal Hendricks, I have sworn statements from 3 servants in the Remington household, all of whom witnessed Charles Morrison striking Rose on multiple occasions. I also have a statement from the seamstress who had to repeatedly alter Rose's wedding dress because she kept losing weight from stress. And I have a letter from Rose's late mother, written to me shortly before her death, describing her concerns about Thomas's temper and controlling behavior." She handed the documents to the marshal, who began reading through them. Thomas and Charles exchanged worried glances. "These statements are lies," Charles said. "The servants were paid to invent stories." "By whom?" Catherine asked coolly. "I paid them nothing. I simply asked them to tell the truth about what they saw." Marshal Hendricks finished reading and looked at Thomas. "Mr. Remington, these are serious allegations. If they are true, your petition for guardianship will not stand." "They are not true. Catherine has always been jealous of our family's success, and she is using Rose to exact some petty revenge." "Jealous?" Catherine laughed. "Thomas, I live quite comfortably in Kansas. I have no need of your wealth or status. I am here because my sister asked me, with her dying breath, to watch over Rose if she ever needed help. I failed to intervene sooner, but I will not fail now." Rose stepped forward. "Aunt Catherine, you kept my mother's letter all these years." "I did. She made me promise to give it to you when the time was right. I think that time is now." Catherine handed Rose an envelope, yellowed with age. Rose opened it with shaking hands and began to read. Dalton watched her face as emotions played across its sadness, anger, understanding, and finally a kind of peace. "My mother knew," Rose said quietly. "She knew what my father was, what he would try to make me become. She told Aunt Catherine to help me find the courage to choose my own path." Rose looked at her father. "She forgave you at the end. She said she hoped I would too eventually, but she also said I should never sacrifice my happiness for your ambitions the way she did." Thomas looked stricken. For the first time since arriving, his composure cracked. "Your mother loved me. She understood that I did what I did for the family." "No," Rose said. "She loved you despite what you did. There is a difference." Marshal Hendricks mounted his horse. "Mr. Remington, based on this evidence, I cannot support your petition. Your daughter is an adult and has the right to choose where she lives and whom she associates with. Unless you have evidence of criminal wrongdoing by Mr. McKenzie, I suggest you accept her decision." "This is not over," Charles said. "Rose, you are making a mistake. You will regret this." "The only thing I regret," Rose said clearly, "is that I did not leave sooner." The group rode off, though Thomas looked back once, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Catherine remained behind, and when they were gone, she pulled Rose into a fierce embrace. "I am so proud of you," Catherine said. "You are stronger than your mother ever got the chance to be." "Thank you for coming," Rose said, her voice muffled against her aunt's shoulder. "Thank you for keeping her letter. I only wish I had intervened sooner." Catherine pulled back and looked at Dalton. "And you must be the man who gave my niece shelter when she needed it most." "Dalton McKenzie, madam. Catherine Saunders. Rose has written to me about you. She did not exaggerate your character. She has been writing to you." Dalton asked, looking at Rose. Rose smiled. "I told you I would write when I arrived safely. I just did not mention that I kept writing after that. And what did these letters say? That I had found someone who understood me. Someone who made me want to be brave enough to come back and fight for a different life." Catherine looked between them with obvious satisfaction. "I see. Well then, I will return to my hotel in Oklahoma City and leave you two to your evening. Rose, I will stay in town for a few more days in case there are any further complications. But I believe your father understands now that he has lost this battle." After Catherine left, Dalton and Rose stood together in the yard, the tension of the confrontation slowly draining away. Rose looked down at her mother's letter, then carefully folded it and placed it in her pocket. "What did she say?" Dalton asked. "In the letter, that love should feel like freedom, not a cage. That the right person would encourage me to grow, not diminish me to make themselves feel larger. That I should never settle for less than I deserved, even if it meant standing alone." Rose looked at him. "She would have liked you. I wish I could have met her. So do I." Rose took his hand. "Dalton, I know we have been careful with each other. taking things slowly, being respectful of the complexity of the situation. But I do not want to be careful anymore. I want to be honest about what I feel and what I want. What do you want? He asked, though his heart already knew the answer. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up and see you every morning. I want to work beside you and laugh with you and argue with you and make peace with you. I want everything, Dalton. All the messy, complicated, beautiful parts of sharing a life with another person. Dalton pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. I want that too. I have wanted it since the moment you asked me if broken people could heal. The answer is yes, Rose. We can heal. We are healing. Together. She tilted her face up, and he kissed her, soft at first and then deeper, years of loneliness and careful self-protection dissolving in the warmth of connection. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," Dalton said. "Not because you need protection or because society expects it, but because I love you and want to spend my life with you." "Yes," Rose said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Oklahoma City. Catherine stood as Rose's witness, and Dalton asked his closest neighbor, an older rancher named Samuel who had been quietly supportive through all the drama, to stand as his. Rose wore a simple blue dress that Catherine had helped her make, and Dalton wore his best suit, and they spoke vows that they wrote themselves about partnership and respect and love that would weather any storm. Thomas Remington did not attend, though Catherine reported that he had seemed resigned to the marriage when she informed him of it. Charles Morrison had left Oklahoma City shortly after the confrontation at Dalton's ranch, reportedly returning to his family's holdings in Texas. Rose expressed relief at both absences, saying she wanted her wedding to be about beginning something new rather than ending something old. The winter that followed their marriage was the happiest time Dalton could remember since his parents were alive. Rose threw herself into improving the ranch, suggesting innovations and working alongside him in ways that made the labor feel less like work and more like collaboration. They talked endlessly about everything and nothing, learning each other's minds and hearts. They argued sometimes, as any two people living in close quarters will, but even their arguments felt different from anything Dalton had experienced. Rose did not withdraw or become meek when they disagreed. She stated her position clearly and expected him to do the same, and they worked through their differences with a respect that never wavered. In bed, they discovered each other slowly, with tenderness and patience. Rose had been afraid at first that her experiences with Charles might have damaged her ability to be intimate. But Dalton's gentleness and clear desire for her pleasure as much as his own helped her relax into the experience. They learned to communicate, to ask for what they wanted and to give freely, and their physical relationship became another way they understood each other. Spring arrived, and with it came a letter from Thomas Remington. Rose opened it with trepidation, but as she read, her expression softened. "He apologizes," she said, looking at Dalton in surprise. "My father actually apologizes. He says he has been doing a great deal of thinking since last fall, and that he realizes he treated me the way his father treated him as a piece in a larger game, rather than as a person with desires and dreams of my own. He says he does not expect forgiveness, but he hopes that perhaps someday we might be able to have a relationship based on honesty rather than obligation." "How do you feel about that?" Dalton asked. Rose considered. Surprised, wary, but also hopeful. "I do not know if I can fully forgive him for everything he put me through, especially for pushing me toward Charles despite the warning signs. But perhaps, with time, we can find a way forward. He is still my father after all. Then we will take it slowly. If he proves himself genuine in his remorse, we will welcome him. If not, we will maintain our distance. It is your decision." "Our decision," Rose corrected. "We are partners now. Your opinion matters to me." Over the following months, Thomas did prove himself genuine. He wrote regularly, never pressuring Rose to visit or demanding anything of her, simply sharing news and expressing interest in her life. Eventually, Rose wrote back, tentatively at first and then with more ease. By summer, they had established a careful correspondence that, while not warm, was at least cordial. In July, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She told Dalton one morning as they watched the sunrise, her voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I am going to have a baby. Our baby." "Are you ready to be a father?" Dalton pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "I am terrified and thrilled, and so grateful that I get to do this with you." "I am scared too," Rose admitted. "My mother died young. What if something happens to me? What if I am not a good mother? You will be an excellent mother. You are strong and kind and patient and brave, and nothing is going to happen to you. We will make sure you have the best care available." Rose leaned into him. "Tell me again that broken people can heal." "Broken people can heal," Dalton said. "We are living proof of that. And our child will grow up knowing that love is not about control or possession, but about freedom and support and choosing each other every day." Their son was born in March of 1880, a healthy baby with Rose's gray eyes and Dalton's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after the neighbor who had stood with Dalton at his wedding, and the older man cried when they told him. Rose proved to be a natural mother, attentive without being smothering, gentle but firm when needed. Dalton discovered reserves of patience he did not know he possessed, walking the floor with Samuel in the middle of the night, and singing off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby even as they made Rose laugh. Thomas Remington asked to visit when he heard about his grandson, and after much discussion, Rose agreed. He came to the ranch on a sunny April afternoon, arriving alone and looking older than Rose remembered. When he first saw Samuel, tears filled his eyes. "He is beautiful," Thomas said. "May I hold him?" Rose hesitated only a moment before placing her son in her father's arms. They all watched as Thomas cradled the baby, his expression full of wonder and regret. "I am sorry," Thomas said, looking at Rose, "for everything I did wrong. For not protecting you when you needed protection. For valuing my ambitions over your happiness. You deserved so much better from me." "Yes," Rose said quietly, "I did, but thank you for saying it." "You have built a good life here," Thomas observed, looking around at the neat ranch, the well-tended animals, the obvious care that had gone into making it a home. "You and Dalton have done well." "We have," Rose agreed, "because we built it together as equals. That is what I needed, Father. Not wealth or status, but partnership and respect." Thomas nodded slowly. "Your mother tried to tell me that once. I did not listen. I regret that more than I can express. They did not achieve full reconciliation that day, but it was a beginning." Thomas began visiting regularly, developing a relationship with his grandson and slowly rebuilding trust with his daughter. He never overstepped or made demands, and Rose gradually found that she could forgive, if not forget. The ranch prospered over the following years. Dalton and Rose expanded their herd, added chickens and pigs, planted a large garden that yielded more vegetables than they could use, and allowed them to sell the surplus in Oklahoma City. Rose's business sense and Dalton's work ethic combined to make them successful, and they were able to save money and improve their property year after year. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Grace in 1882 and another son, Thomas, in 1885. The house that had once seemed so empty now rang with children's laughter and the happy chaos of family life. Dalton and Rose navigated the challenges of raising 3 children with the same partnership they brought to everything, supporting each other through the exhausting early years and the complex later ones. Catherine became a regular presence in their lives, visiting several times a year and doting on her great nieces and nephews. She and Dalton developed a warm friendship, and she often remarked that Rose had chosen far better than anyone else in the family ever had. In 1890, 12 years after Rose had appeared on his doorstep in a ruined wedding dress, Dalton woke early one morning and made his way to the porch to watch the sunrise. He had maintained this ritual throughout the years, finding peace in the quiet start to each day. He was surprised to find Rose already there, wrapped in a shawl against the cool spring air. She smiled when she saw him. "I woke up and you were not in bed. I thought I might find you here." Dalton settled beside her, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sky lightened. After a few minutes, Rose spoke. "You ever think about that night I arrived here, how different our lives would be if you had turned me away? You know I could never have done that. I know. But do you ever wonder?" Dalton considered. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we have built together, this family, this home, this life, and I cannot imagine having made any other choice." "I asked you if broken people could heal," Rose said softly. "You told me they could, that they could become something new in the broken places. You were right." "We were both right. We healed each other." Rose leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Dalton McKenzie. Thank you for opening your door that night. Thank you for seeing me when I could barely see myself. I love you too. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for choosing to fight for us." They sat together as the sun rose higher, painting the Oklahoma plains in gold and copper, and listened as their children began to wake inside the house. In a few minutes, the peaceful morning would give way to the happy chaos of family life: breakfast to make, chores to assign, countless small tasks that made up the substance of their days. But for now, they simply sat together. 2 people who had been broken and who had healed, who had found each other in their darkest moments and built something bright and lasting from the ruins of their former lives. Samuel emerged onto the porch, now a sturdy 10-year-old with his father's serious demeanor and his mother's thoughtful eyes. "Mama, Papa, Grace took my book again." "We will sort it out," Rose said, standing and ruffling her son's hair. "Come, let us see what kind of chaos your sister has created this time." Samuel followed his mother inside, already launching into a detailed explanation of the injustice he had suffered. Dalton remained on the porch for one more moment, savoring the peace before the day truly began. He thought about the man he had been 12 years ago, isolated and convinced that solitude was safety. He thought about Rose, desperate and fleeing, asking a stranger if broken people could heal. And he thought about the family they had created together, proof that the answer to that question was not just yes, but something far more profound. Broken people could not just heal. They could thrive. They could build lives of meaning and joy and connection. They could become, in their brokenness, more whole than they had ever been when they thought they were undamaged. Inside, Grace was shouting something about how Samuel had left the book in her room so it was fair for her to read it. And Thomas, their youngest, was banging a spoon against the table in what he probably thought was a helpful contribution to the discussion. Rose's voice rose above the chaos, patient and firm, negotiating peace between warring siblings. Dalton smiled and went inside to help his wife manage their beautiful, chaotic, perfectly imperfect family. This was healing, he thought. Not the absence of scars, but the ability to carry them without being defined by them. Not forgetting the pain, but not letting it poison the present. They ate breakfast together, All five of them crowded around the table that had once served only Dalton's solitary meals. Samuel and Grace continued their debate over the book with the passionate intensity that only children could bring to minor disputes. Thomas spilled his milk and then laughed so hard at his own clumsiness that everyone else started laughing too. After breakfast, the children scattered to their morning chores. Samuel headed out to feed the chickens, Grace went to gather eggs, and Thomas, still too young for significant responsibilities, followed his older siblings around trying to help. Rose and Dalton cleaned up the kitchen together, moving around each other with the practiced ease of long familiarity. "Thomas wants to visit next month," Rose said as she dried a plate. "He asked if he could bring the children some gifts. What do you think? I think it would be nice. He has become a good grandfather, even if he was a difficult father. The children love his visits. Then we will welcome him, as always." Rose set down the towel and turned to face Dalton. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life. That I get to wake up every day in a home filled with love and laughter. That I have children who will never know what it is like to walk on eggshells or fear someone's temper. That I have a husband who sees me as an equal partner rather than a possession to be managed." Dalton crossed to her and took her hands. "You created this life, Rose. You had the courage to run from what was wrong and fight for what was right. I just had the good fortune to be there when you needed help." "We created this life," Rose corrected. "Together, just like we do everything." They kissed, a brief tender moment of connection in the midst of their busy day, and then returned to the work that needed doing. There were always tasks on a ranch, always something that required attention or repair or tending. But the work felt lighter when it was shared, when it was in service of a life they had chosen rather than one that had been chosen for them. That evening, after the children were in bed, Dalton and Rose sat on the porch again, wrapped in a blanket against the cool night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to its pack. "You remember what you said to me that first morning?" Rose asked. "When I told you about Charles and my father and asked if broken people could heal. I said that broken people could become something different, something stronger in the broken places. You also said that healing meant not getting back to who you were, but becoming someone new, someone who remembers the before but also carries the after." Rose turned to look at him. "I think about that often, about how I am not the same person I was when I arrived here, but I am also not entirely different. I am something new made from the pieces of who I was and who I have become." "We both are," Dalton said. "I am not the isolated, lonely man who convinced himself that solitude was safety. But I am also not someone who has forgotten what it felt like to lose people I loved. I carry both versions of myself, the before and the after, and somehow that makes me more complete." "That is what healing is," Rose said. "Not erasing the scars, but integrating them into who we are, learning to carry our pain without being crushed by it." They sat in comfortable silence, and Dalton reflected on how much his understanding of healing had evolved over the years. When Rose first asked him that question, he had spoken from theory, from his own incomplete journey toward wholeness. But now, after years of building a life together, he understood it more deeply. Healing was not a destination but a process, ongoing and never quite finished. There were still days when Rose woke from nightmares about Charles, when the memories of that time rose up and threatened to overwhelm her. There were still moments when Dalton felt the old fear of loss, when one of the children got sick or Rose was late returning from town, and panic would rise in his throat. But they had learned to navigate those moments together. They had learned to speak their fears aloud, to ask for reassurance, to hold each other through the difficult times. And slowly, over years of patience and love and mutual support, The bad moments had become less frequent and less intense. "What are you thinking about?" Rose asked. "About how grateful I am. For you, for our children, for this life we have built. About how different everything is from what I expected. Different better or different worse. So much better that I cannot even articulate it. I thought I knew what my life would be: solitary, simple, focused on survival rather than joy. And then you appeared and changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Rose said. "You showed me that men could be kind without expecting something in return. That partnership could be based on mutual respect rather than domination. You gave me a safe place to land when I was falling, and then you helped me learn to fly again." "That is a very poetic way of describing you stealing my best horse and disappearing for 2 weeks," Rose laughed. "I did not steal her, I borrowed her, and I came back." "You came back," Dalton agreed, pulling her closer. "That is the part that matters most. You came back and chose to stay." They remained on the porch until the cold drove them inside, and they went to bed wrapped around each other. Two people who had found in each other something they had not even known they were looking for. The years continued to pass. Samuel grew into a serious young man who shared his father's work ethic and his mother's thoughtfulness. He showed an interest in veterinary medicine, and Dalton and Rose encouraged this, saving money to send him to study in Kansas City when he was old enough. Grace proved to be artistic and headstrong, constantly challenging her parents with questions and ideas. She wanted to know why women could not own property in their own names, why they could not vote, why so many rules seemed designed to limit what she could do with her life. Rose answered these questions honestly, explaining the injustices, while also teaching Grace how to navigate a world that was not always fair. Thomas, their youngest, was cheerful and social, making friends everywhere he went and approaching life with an optimism that both delighted and occasionally exasperated his more serious older siblings. He kept the household lively with his constant chatter and endless energy. In 1895, when Rose was 41 and Dalton 49, they received word that Thomas Remington had died peacefully in his sleep. Rose grieved, but it was a clean grief, complicated but not bitter. She had forgiven her father years ago for his failures, and the time they had spent rebuilding their relationship had been meaningful to both of them. At the funeral in Oklahoma City, Rose spoke about her father with honesty and compassion, acknowledging both his flaws and his late life efforts to make amends. She talked about the importance of forgiveness and second chances, and about how people could change if they were willing to do the hard work of self-examination. Afterward, several people approached Rose to thank her for her words. One woman, perhaps 50 years old, pulled Rose aside. "I was at your first wedding," the woman said quietly. "Or rather, I was supposed to be. I saw you run, and I remember thinking you were so brave. My daughter is engaged to a man I do not trust, but I do not know how to help her see that she deserves better. Your story gives me hope that she might find her own courage." Rose took the woman's hands. "Tell her the truth. Tell her that love should not hurt, that the right person will treat her with respect and kindness. Tell her that it is never too late to choose differently. And tell her that there are people who will help if she needs to run. Sometimes knowing you have support is what makes the running possible." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. I will tell her." As Dalton and Rose drove home from the funeral, Rose was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I hope that woman's daughter finds her courage. I hope she does not waste as much time as I did in a situation that was hurting her." "You found your courage when you needed it most," Dalton said. "That is what matters. But I wish I had found it sooner. I wish I had run the first time Charles hit me rather than waiting until my wedding day. Think of all the time I wasted, all the pain I could have avoided. Rose, you cannot torture yourself with might-have-beens. You made the best choices you could with the information and support you had at the time, and when you were ready, you acted. That is not weakness. That is strength. Rose leaned against him. How do you always know the right thing to say? Years of practice. And loving you enough to pay attention to what you need to hear. By 1900, Samuel had completed his studies and returned to Oklahoma to set up a veterinary practice in Oklahoma City. Grace had shocked everyone by announcing her intention to become a teacher and had enrolled in a training program in Kansas. Thomas was 15 and showing signs of inheriting his father's love of ranching. Dalton and Rose, now in their early 50s, found themselves entering a new phase of life. With the children grown or growing, the house was quieter, and they had more time for each other. They took long walks in the evenings, worked side by side in the garden, and talked about their plans for the future. "I have been thinking," Rose said one evening as they sat on their familiar porch, "about the woman at my father's funeral, the one whose daughter was engaged to the wrong man. What about her? I wonder how many women are in situations like I was, trapped or nearly trapped with men who hurt them, not knowing how to escape or believing they do not deserve better. I wonder if there is something we could do to help. What did you have in mind? I do not know exactly. But perhaps we could offer our home as a safe place, the way you offered it to me. Perhaps we could let it be known that women who need help have a place to go, at least temporarily." Dalton considered this. It could be dangerous. Men like Charles Morrison do not take kindly to their property being hidden from them. "I know. But is that reason enough not to try?" "No," Dalton said slowly. "No, it is not. If you want to do this, then we will do it together. We will be careful, but we will do it." And so they began, quietly and carefully, letting it be known through trusted contacts that their ranch was a safe haven for women fleeing dangerous situations. Over the following years, they helped perhaps a dozen women, providing shelter, supplies, and assistance in getting to safer locations. Each woman who came through their door reminded Dalton of that September evening in 1878, when Rose had appeared in a ruined wedding dress, asking if broken people could heal. And each woman who left their ranch to build a new life elsewhere was proof that the answer was yes. Some of the women wrote back, sharing news of their new lives. Others disappeared completely, and Dalton and Rose hoped that meant they had found peace. Not all the stories had happy endings. They learned that one woman had returned to her husband and been killed by him shortly after, but most did. Most found safety and rebuilt their lives, just as Rose had done, in 1905, on a September evening 27 years after they met. Dalton and Rose sat on their porch watching yet another sunset. They were older now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces, but their eyes still held the same warmth and understanding they had shared from the beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Rose asked. "Taking me in that night, all the complications I brought into your life?" "Never," Dalton said without hesitation. "You gave me everything I did not know I needed: family, purpose, joy, a reason to be brave. You transformed my life, Rose. We transformed each other's lives," she said. "That is what love does when it is real. It changes both people into better versions of themselves." "Can broken people heal?" Dalton asked, echoing her question from so long ago. Rose smiled. "Yes, broken people can heal. We are living proof." They sat together as the stars emerged, as they had done thousands of times over the years, and watched the night settle over the Oklahoma plains. Inside, the house that had once been too quiet now held memories of laughter and tears, of children growing up and finding their own paths, of two broken people who had found each other and built something whole. Samuel was in Oklahoma City with his thriving practice. Grace was teaching in Kansas, already making a difference in her students' lives. Thomas was learning to run the ranch, showing every sign of eventually taking over when Dalton was ready to step back. "We have had a good life," Rose said softly. "We have," Dalton agreed. "And we are not finished yet." "No," Rose said, taking his hand. "We are not finished yet." They remained on the porch, two people who had answered a question about healing by living the answer every day. Two people who had taken their brokenness and forged it into something beautiful. Two people who had proven that courage and kindness and love could overcome even the deepest wounds. As the years went on, they continued their work helping women in need, continued loving their children and eventually their grandchildren, continued building a life based on mutual respect and partnership. They grew old together, supporting each other through the various challenges that age brought, and finding joy in simple moments shared. Dalton lived to be 78, passing peacefully in his sleep with Rose beside him. She survived him by 3 years, spending that time with her children and grandchildren, sharing stories about their father and the life they had built together. When Rose died at 74, surrounded by family, her last words were about that September evening in 1878 when she had ridden up to a stranger's door and asked if broken people could heal. She told her children and grandchildren that the answer was yes, that healing was always possible for those brave enough to seek it, and that love had the power to make whole even the most shattered hearts. Samuel inherited the ranch and continued his parents' tradition of offering sanctuary to women in need. Grace wrote a book about her mother's life, sharing Rose's story with a wider audience and inspiring countless women to find their own courage. Thomas raised his children on the ranch, teaching them about hard work and kindness, and the importance of standing up for what was right. The house that Dalton built and Rose made into a home stood for many more years, passed down through generations of their family. And though the specific details of that September night eventually faded into family legend, the essential truth remained. Two broken people had found each other in darkness and created light, and that light had spread out to touch countless other lives. Can broken people heal? Rose had asked. Yes, their lives answered. Yes, they can. And in healing, they become not just whole again, but something even better, something stronger, wiser, and more capable of bringing healing to others. That was the legacy of Dalton McKenzie and Rose Remington, the gruff cowboy and the lost bride who found each other on the Oklahoma plains and built a love that endured long after they were gone. Their story became a reminder that hope exists even in our darkest moments, that courage can be found when we most need it, and that healing is not just possible but inevitable when we have the strength to reach for it and the grace to accept help along the way.